Castellaneta voiced Squidward. Although the name of this entry may appear to be a statement, it really just means to refer to it as a rumor, cause it looks like Dan or Dan Castellaneta never actually voiced Squidward. And I guess we have good reasons to safely say that, as there is no mention of it on the internet, no SpongeBob reference in Dan Castellaneta's Wikipedia and on other sites too. There is not even a reference to Dan Castellaneta in SpongeBob's cast. If Dan had done even a single episode as the voice of Squidward, fans believe it would have been somewhere at least. That is why perhaps we can conclude looking at that all this isn't really true. So where did this whole thing come from? Well, the only source which at least the OP could find is this video by Channel Federator. That is said to be the reason why this entry is here. We see that this really could just be some misunderstanding there. At 62nd number of the 107 SpongeBob facts that this video goes through is when we get to know that.
Number 62. If Squidward reminds you of someone on occasion, it may be because he's sometimes voiced by Dan Castellaneta, the same actor who voices Homer Simpson.
Nothing much else really which could be found, but no worries, because the source where this detail was found during the making of this video is most likely the actual culprit here. That's okay, at least it led to this spot in the final tier of this iceberg.
Safety first!
Karate is sex. Sure. So this is a fan theory and is one of those ones that you find completely ridiculous at first, but you keep reading hopelessly and you at least begin to accept the reason why someone out there thought so. You just understand, yeah, I don't really think so, but yeah, I see how you got there. Okay, so there's this episode of SpongeBob in season 1 called Karate Choppers, and what basically this theory has done is that it has compared the complete storyline of the episode and little details inside of it to the idea of sex, to the point of stating that the whole episode is a metaphor for sex. And now for the glorious analogy that made it to the bottommost tier of this iceberg. In the episode, Sandy is already present in SpongeBob's house, so that definitely suggests that they are in a relationship, right? Right. As SpongeBob wears his helmet in the episode, he says,
Safety first!
The theory says that because SpongeBob winks at the camera while wearing the helmet and at the same time saying safety first, it clearly suggests condoms being important for safety in sex. Yeah, see, he's looking at the camera. Later in the night, SpongeBob calls up Sandy and tries to karate her over the phone, which Sandy tackles and says,
Nice try, Sponge Brain!
And that obviously points towards the
Booty call.
Okay, you know what, let's move on. I think you got the idea. I'll link the theory in the description for ones who wanted me to go on, or here it is for you right here. I don't even know if I could read it here. 5572220. If you go around telling your friends that the SpongeBob's episode with the production number 5572220 is a lost episode, it's possible that one of them would ask you to in fact get lost, because they might have seen the season 3 episode SpongeBob Meets the Strangler listed under the episode 5572220 on some fan-made SpongeBob page in fandom or something. But you can very well make your comeback then and there and ask them to check out the Wikipedia to see how SpongeBob and the Strangler is actually 5572221. If you manually search for the 220 code in the wiki, you do find an entry, and for a second it might feel as you've solved the mystery when you see the code assigned to the episode. But if you notice, you'll see two production codes assigned to 5572220 and 5572208, two codes for the same episode, when all of the other episodes seem to have just one allotted to them. A quick search for the code of in the fandom site would give you the latter assigned to it. Maybe because that episode had two parts and one code is assigned to each. Either way, it looks like 220 is a question that we don't know the answer to for sure. Did the team just skip the number for some reason? Is it a lost episode? Or oh, is it again that Red Mist episode? Or maybe one episode too gruesome to be televised to general audience? How can we say that? This is where the whole creepypasta thing comes into the picture. Because other than the fans who say that SpongeBob dies in this episode, an overwhelming consensus is that Nick hit the episode for it being too scary for kids, leading us to believe this post by an anonymous user. Let's read. Hello. I can't tell you my name because if I do, it could put me in more danger than I am currently. So you can just refer to me by the nickname Crazy Steve. I used to work at Nickelodeon as a storyboarder for the show SpongeBob. I have decided that the world needs to know about something. There is a cancelled episode of SpongeBob called SpongeBob's Revenge. All of the normal writers were out that day, so we had to get a replacement writer. I'll get to them later. For now, I'll just say that they were a troubled person. The episode starts with SpongeBob watching TV with Gary. Except in this episode, Gary is Mouse for no discernible reason. I guess the writer thought it would be funny. SpongeBob is watching TV and having a good time until the news comes on. The news is going over normal news stuff, like all of the disappearances and unusual murders in the area. SpongeBob then makes a joke about socialists in relation to the murders and disappearances. There is then a knock on the door. It's Mr. Krabs. Mr. Krabs then asks, SpongeBob, me boy, may you look at that wall and not turn back around. SpongeBob then hesitantly agrees and looks at the wall. Mr. Krabs then steals Gary and runs off. It then cuts to a few hours later card before cutting back to SpongeBob. SpongeBob then says, okay Mr. Krabs, can I turn around now? SpongeBob then turns around and asks, where's Mr. Krabs and Gary? He then finds a note by Mr. Krabs that says, ho ho ho, SpongeBob, boy, I stole Gary and I will turn him into meat within the next 30 minutes. Ho ho ho, you're also terminated from your position at the Krusty Krab. Ho ho ho. SpongeBob's eyes then turn red and start to bleed blood. He then collapses to the floor and lets out an agonizing scream of pure pain and suffering. He then gets back up and smiles. He goes and gets an already bloody knife from the kitchen and says, it's time to rip and tear. It then cuts to a shot of SpongeBob skipping into Squidward's house. Inside the house, SpongeBob confronts Squidward. Squidward, despite SpongeBob's bloody eyes and bloody knife, then says in an annoyed voice like it is some sort of daily occurrence, SpongeBob, what are you doing here at this time of the day? SpongeBob responds, hey Squidward, are you going downward into the grave? Squidward then slams the door on SpongeBob. SpongeBob then cuts through the door and says, here's Sponge. It then cuts to an overhead shot of the house. You can hear Squidward's screams, and the scene ends. It then cuts to the next scene. SpongeBob is then in front of Patrick's house. He knocks on Patrick's rock and it opens up. Patrick is horrified at the sponge. He shouts, oh no, capitalism has stolen Sponge. I knew Mr. Krabs would corrupt you. Sponge then throws his knife and murders Patrick. He then laughs an evil laugh and says, now for Mr. Krab. It then cuts to Mr. Krabs cooking Gary in the Krusty Krab. He hears an explosion and runs outside. SpongeBob is approaching a giant space fortress. He's in some science fiction super armor and holding a super shotgun. Heavy metal is playing. Mr. Krabs then rubs his eyes. It turns out he was just hallucinating. He sighs a breath of relief and then turns around to go back inside. But the slippery little sponge is blocking the entrance. Mr. Krabs is scared, so he screams. SpongeBob laughs and shouts, this is your end, Mr. Krab. Your reign of tyranny over fast food industry is over. The crab then responds, I didn't do it to hurt you. I just wanted the money. SpongeBob then says, I am now more powerful than I have ever been. Even King Triton will fear me now. SpongeBob then runs up to breaks Mr. Krabs' neck. SpongeBob then uses his sponge powers to fly away. He flies over Bikini Bottom and releases his hand. Fire then flies out of his hand and then rains down on the city. He laughs as the city is wiped out of existence. The episode then ends there. This episode was of course very disturbing, so there was an investigation. After later investigation, it turns out the writer of this episode was a cultist and murderer who had a sick sense of humor. They escaped before we could send them to jail. The episode itself was fully finished because the producer said to just keep working on it. That was before they actually saw it. I wanted to let people know because, wait, who's knocking the door? Who are you? Not bad, and believable too if you somehow managed to avoid the last few words. Well, it could very well be the case, or if that was too depressing, then let me relieve you by saying that it is also possible that it is simply a production error and nothing else.
I want to be Dirty Dan.
Dirty Dan is Dan Snyder. To understand this, we'll need to understand Two things. Who is Dirty Dan and why is Dan Schneider, the CEO of Nick, in here? Well, first off, for Dirty Dan, we'll need to talk about the Season 2 episode Survival of the Idiots, in which SpongeBob and Patrick, despite being especially prohibited from getting inside the tree dome for it being winter, the hibernation period for Sandy,
That means you, SpongeBob.
of course get inside, and upon seeing an inflated Sandy sleeping, dreaming in the treehouse, trying to catch some Dirty Dan and some Pinhead Larry,
I've had enough of your dastardly deeds, Dirty Dan. I'm gonna get you and your partner, Pinhead Larry.
decide to play around being those characters,
Look out, Sandy. I'm Dirty Dan.
mainly fighting over who's gonna be the Dirty Dan.
I'd say I'm Dirty Dan.
Probably because he was leader of Pinhead Larry in their duo in Sandy's dream, and so nobody wanted to be Pinhead Larry.
Who you calling Pinhead?
Although this all eventually wakes Sandy up, but that's beside the point. Let's just remember Dirty Dan for now, one of the outlaws from Sandy's dream. And now Dan Schneider, the CEO of Nick, is in here because of certain allegations and theories about him, including alleged sexual behavior, his verbal abuse on the set, and how he has a thing for feet, like how it's theorized about Patrick. Which makes fans and theorists link these Dan Schneider accusations and things with the bits and pieces from the SpongeBob and other Nick shows. In case of this entry, this Dirty Dan guy, who they see as a hint from the writers about the Dirty Dan, supposedly to warn us all about the whole situation way back in 2001, remarkably predating the said allegations. r/SpongeBob Gore. r/SpongeBob Gore is a subreddit that welcomes gory re-edits of SpongeBob media by the users. It's a still active page on Reddit, so let's in fact have a look, why not? SpongeBob Gore, like SpongeBob didn't already have enough of it. Subreddit dedicated to adding blood and such to SpongeBob scenes. Well, of course, it can include fan art as well, I'm sure. Like, stuff that our morbid curiosity always wanted to see. Tom finally cooking Jerry, Sylvester finally eating Tweety, Elmer finally killing Bugs Bunny. That kind of stuff, which I might have to censor. But this could be your next stop. I won't stop you. Anyways, this was the very last entry of the very last tier of this very first Iceberg video I ever attempted. So, go explore this or maybe anything else we discussed in this Iceberg. Links are in the description. There is a lot of stuff in the description, Other than that, I guess I have nothing better to say, but just that. Thank you. If I'm not alone and you're still here, see you around.